So welcome everybody to our crossover presentation of the File for Delta Summer Webinar Series and the P.A.D Speaker Series. My name is Corey Freeman and I'm the Director of Communications at File for Delta's Executive Office. For those of you that are here as part of the summer series, a reminder that registration will remain open until the final presentation begins on July 22nd. So feel free to share this with your friends. You will have access to session recordings that will be sent out by email at the completion of the series at the end of July. We are excited to welcome you to today's presentation, Why Be a Lawyer When You Can Be a Legal Innovator, hosted by Professor Joe Regalia. Professor Regalia graduated first in his class at the University of Michigan Law School, clerked for the U.S. District Courts and the Ninth Circuit Court, as he just mentioned, practiced at 3 AM Law 100 firms, and is a member of the faculty at the, a faculty member at the William S. Boyd School of Law. Joe's research and thought leadership focus on legal writing, technology, and innovation. He regularly leads training for elite law firms and organizations, including Fortune 500 companies, the Department of Justice, and U.S. Courts of Appeals. He is also the co-founder of Write.law, a legal skills training company used by thousands of attorneys, judges, and students around the world. Write.law actually offers legal foundation courses customized to File for Delta pre-law and law students. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat for more information on our partnership with Write.law. And with that, I'll turn it over to your host as he presents Why Be a Lawyer When You Can Be a Legal Innovator.
Thank you so much, Corey. So you made me sound about 20 times cooler than I actually am, but I appreciate it. Welcome, folks. So my name is Joe Regalia, as Corey had mentioned, law professor. I just spend a whole lot of time focusing on technology and innovation and looking at how this stuff is changing the entire legal industry, but especially changing what it means to be a lawyer. And because we're talking about technology today, I have a fun little, technology challenge at the start. If folks are interested, it's not, entirely required, right? But if you've never used QR codes, you point your smartphone camera right at this little square and allow you to pull up a little handout. That handout will just make it a little bit easier at a couple parts of our talk tonight to interact a little bit. Before we get started, please feel free to throw comments and questions into the chat. The question and answer feature, if you've ever used that, the Q&A is also open. So you can either throw a question right into the chat or put it into the Q&A. Do not feel like you have to wait till the end. I'll try to leave a few minutes at the end to chat, but stop us if you have questions. I'd love to just chat as we go. And I promise, if it's totally off topic or something weird or whatever, I'll just wait until the right time to answer. So don't hesitate to interact tonight. So I want to start with a quick little video.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Above the Line, an intimate conversation with some of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. I'm Mark Ellis, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tom Cruise.
Honor and a privilege to be here, Mark.
Next to him is, good to see you, as always, Jeff Goldblum. Ewan McGregor to my left. To his left is Robert Downey Jr.
Hi, I'm Robert Downey Jr.
And to his left is George Lucas.
Well, I apologize. Earlier, I had a burrito, and I think I've got the Kessel runs.
So, I knew something. I thought it was a game.
Okay, kind of funny. Obviously, those, well, maybe not obviously. If you don't know, those are not actually those actors. These are examples of deep fakes. So we have so many new technologies coming out all the time. And, I think the entire society, right, all of us, are trying to figure out how to deal with all these new emerging technologies. And one thing, if you're interested in becoming a lawyer, you'll instantly find is that anytime there's new technology, it really falls on lawyers to figure out, what to do with that technology, how to regulate it, how to handle it. Deepfakes are a great example, right? What does it mean when, and we're very, very close to this point, if not there already, what does it mean when folks can, pretend to be a politician during an election, right? And release videos saying, whatever other folks want that politician to say. Same thing with celebrities. And we've seen some examples of this stuff already. And yet, as we'll talk about throughout the evening today, the law really has not caught up, and it largely sits on lawyers' shoulders to figure out how we're going to deal with all these new technologies smartly, right? And kind of reduce the harm that has been carried out on all of us. But today I want to talk about two big categories, two big buckets. The first is, the deepfake stuff, right? So that is all the different new emerging technologies that are inundating us, and why we need lawyers, why we need legal folks at the forefront to help us deal with this stuff. So first half of the talk, we'll look at that. Second half, I want to shift gears, kind of flip this idea and ask, how can lawyers use technology to change how we lawyer? So first big bucket of stuff I want to talk about is emerging tech, how lawyers are going to play a role and how we need lawyers to play a role. And then second, it's going to be how can lawyers, especially new lawyers, use technology and innovation to change what it means to be a lawyer, right? To change how we're providing legal services to clients. So some of these might be familiar to you. Some of them may not be, but I just want to highlight some of what I find the most compelling and interesting emerging technologies out there that really, tee up obvious legal questions, obvious legal issues for us all. The first is, we have companies now using AI to hire folks. And this is pretty incredible. So, imagine, this is already happening with some big companies. Imagine if, you submit your resume for that cool new job and a human being never looks at it, right? An AI tool gets your resume, gets your cover letter, looks at it, compares it, right, to huge databases of other, similar individuals to figure out whether the keywords you used are, a good fit for the company. And then imagine you go even beyond that, and, the AI tool is using scrapers to gather information about you from social media, right, all over the internet, and making hiring decisions based on what you're saying on social media, what you like on social media, what you're buying on Amazon, right? I mean, we know all of that data is out there. Companies are collecting it. Is it that crazy to think that some of these, AI hiring bots are going to be using that information to decide whether to hire you or not? When it's a human being behind that resume drop that's reviewing everything, it's much easier for us to figure out things like, is someone discriminating? Is someone using an improper practice in the hiring? When you have a robot doing all of that, using these very sophisticated algorithms, becomes really difficult, right? Who knows exactly what that robot is using to make their decisions? The answer is, artificial intelligence engineers, right? Experts, not the individuals that maybe are being harmed by these practices. We have really interesting aspects of AI in all sorts of different ways. And I guess I should mention, if you're not super familiar with AI, I'm going to use that probably throughout this chat. I'm going to be referring really to just sophisticated technology. There's a lot of different vocab that's thrown around when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning. I don't want to get too caught up in that. If I use the term, I'm really just meaning it as something that's very advanced. So advanced that basically that AI, that robot, is doing things that normally would require a human to do. So don't get caught up in the nomenclature. But anyway, so we have AI making art. This is actually a growing area. We had one AI created art piece sold for $432,000. Now that's fun. That's cool. Everyone knows it's AI. Maybe nothing's wrong with that. Although if you're interested in IP at all, you might wonder who has the copyright for that. But anywho, what is to stop AI from creating perfect fakes? Art forgery is this huge problem already. It's very, very difficult. I've actually handled a couple of art cases back in the day. It's very, very difficult to detect forgeries these days. But imagine if you have a robot, right, that can replicate every pixel, every brushstroke perfectly. How difficult it would be to detect those forgeries. Should we, and this is always a question with technology like that, should we be regulating who has that technology? This has come up a lot in the 3D printing space. And once we realized that you could print out guns and other crazy things with 3D printers, should it be a crime to possess these devices? I don't know. A theme of this talk will be, for most of the stuff, we don't know. There are no answers. The law has not kept up. We don't really have simple, clear guidance, and it probably is going to fall on lawyers to figure out most of this. Another interesting / maybe scary example is China's social credit scheme. So if folks have heard of this is this concept that you would give folks a social credit score, and they may lose points for doing things like not having their dog on a leash or jaywalking, right? All these kind of social norms that we have. And that score under this proposed scheme could have real impacts for folks. It could, affect what housing you get, what jobs you get, whether you could go to certain private schools. Probably a little terrifying to most of us, right? The thought that this might be how, a government is doing things. If you were a Black Mirror fan, this is basically one of the episodes in Black Mirror was modeled off of this credit scheme. Now, I want to be clear, don't totally panic, because this scheme has not actually been put into place. At one time, it was a proposal that the Chinese government had committed to implementing, but the last I checked in earlier this year, it was not actually being implemented, and probably is going to be changed before some version of it is implemented. But the fact that you have, a government that is proposing in this detail and committing to some sort of scheme like this, absolutely should make us all wonder, what do we do with that, right? If there are similar proposals to, launch a scheme like this in the US or, within an employer, right? So that's probably the most likely place it would come up, is within a large employer. How should we regulate that? How should we think about that? There really are no laws for the most part that guide us into this stuff. Another example is, social engineering. So Facebook and Google and the other tech giants, some of the top technologists out there predict that within our lifetimes, AI powered by all the data from these apps that we use will be able to make better daily life decisions for us than we can make for ourselves. It may sound a little crazy, but if you think about it from the perspective of how much information and data you put out online about what you like, what you don't like, how you express yourself, all that kind of good stuff. I mean, if you had a robot that was listening to all of that and, crunching with massive amounts of data and machine learning and computing power, a profile of you, it's not that crazy to think that over time, that AI could understand your preferences better than you could understand, what the best decisions are in your daily life that you should be making to help you, whether it's your diet or the gym or what you want to watch on TV, whatever it may be. And how do we even start thinking about a world in which technology can make our decisions for us? I mean, we already see the beginnings of this with things like, your Netflix suggestions and all of that kind of stuff. But, the perhaps even scarier side is, with that much information, could a technology be used to nudge us into certain decisions, right? Once you know someone that well, it may be pretty easy to kind of pull the levers and push the buttons and nudge people to make certain decisions. I mean, this is already happening to some extent with social engineering in terms of online marketing and all that kind of good stuff. But it's rarer to ask, is this okay? And how should it be okay? And how should it be regulated? And, what should be the rules or the laws in place to govern all of this? And again, this is going to be a theme. We really don't know. For the most part, there's not many regulations that would tell companies whether they can or can't do things in this area, right? And so it's kind of a Wild West. A favorite emerging technology question that is, for the most part, completely open, and we need lawyers to help with, is the trolley problem. So this is the self-driving car problem. And folks are familiar, this is the idea that, once you have self-driving cars, which are pretty darn close, right? Tesla kind of suggests they already have it, but I don't think it's a real self-driving car yet. But anyways, idea being, look, self-driving car is going to have to make decisions out on the road. And at some point, you think about across the whole, just take the US, at some point, those self-driving cars are going to have to decide who to hurt or what to damage, because there's no way out of kind of an accident, right? So I thought for just a moment, we could look at this really interesting little tool that some folks at Moral Machine developed. Basically what it does is it puts us in these different situations and imagines that we are programming the self-driving car. And it asks, okay, so self-driving car is driving down the road and there's some people where they shouldn't be, right? There's sometimes some animals. And the self-driving car has to decide, am I going to hit this group or am I going to hit the other group? And I'm sorry, it's kind of morbid, but someone's got to figure this stuff out, right? It's going to have to probably be lawyers. So we can jump in. And let's look at a couple of these. And I'm really curious what folks would pick. So on this first one, we've got self-driving car, right? It's going to hit one of these groups. The first group is a man, a woman, 2 dogs, and 1 cat. The other group is 1 man, 1 woman, 2 cats, and a criminal. So I'm going to give you all a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, I'll give you like 30 seconds. What would you pick? So let's say this is A, this is A or B. And I really like this. Ellie pointed out there's less humans in the first one, so that was your vote. Okay. Who else? Who else thinks, A, which would be the 2 boys, 1 girl, and 2 criminals. Oops, I'm so sorry, folks. I lost our place. Oh, Moral Machine. Let's try to find it again. I'm seeing more A's. Ooh, good question. We'll go to another one in just a second because I can't find the last one. Parker raised an interesting question. I feel like it's impossible to decide. Humans wouldn't really be able to decide and process that in time a car might. So Parker, it's a great point. We may have an issue here that didn't exist back when people were driving, but now that we get to leverage the power of technology, we have to make the decision now, right? And so it tees up the same problem, right? Which is, what decision do we make and how do we decide which decision is right? So I'm hearing for Alicia, A for the same reason. Okay, so probably less people. Okay, let's look at a couple other ones here. Very interesting. So this one is going to be, the first group is 1 man and 1 woman are killed. The second group, it's going to kill 1 man and then injure a whole big group of folks. So what do you think? Killing 2 folks or killing 1 person and injuring 4? Let's let's assume it's a very serious injury. So I'm seeing lots of folks say, go with the 1 dead and 4 injured. Does anyone think, look, it's got to be the two folks being killed, because 4 people being seriously injured. Seriously injured. Okay, I'm seeing lots and lots of B. Totally fair. So probably the thought process, most of you, I'm assuming, is, look, killing folks is worse. And so even if these are very serious injuries, and we could imagine, right? Maybe it's, being paralyzed. Who knows? And frankly, yes, some of this stuff, the core, the robot may not be able to anticipate, but some of it you would be surprised. Some of it, it might be able to, right? At least with risk algorithms. See lots of folks talking about, look, killing less folks, that's kind of morally correct. All great thoughts. And look, the reason why I tee this up is it's just a very concrete example of a problem we got to solve now, which is self-driving cars have to make decisions on the road. And already we're at the point that self-driving car will have to at least decide whether to harm the driver of the vehicle or hire someone from the public, or injure someone from the public. As well as when you're talking about property damage, right? It's kind of, okay, whose car do we hurt? Whose car do we destroy? And when we get into these really tough questions, which is when people are dying or being seriously injured, the difficulty gets even harder. Right now, in the vast majority of states, there is no one that is telling the self-driving car companies which of these options, have to be programmed in. And so one question is, do you think that it's okay to just leave this kind of stuff up to companies and the public and kind of whatever happens? Or do we need laws regulating all of this stuff? And if you need laws, where are they going to come from, right? If it's not lawyers pushing for more thoughtful approaches to these new technologies. Love all of the comments. It's like lots and lots of people are thinking, okay, we're going to injure folks. Let's see. Let me go to a couple, one more. We'll do one more and then we'll move on. Ooh, this is an interesting one. What about 5 dogs or 5 cats? What do we think? 5 dogs or 5 cats? This has got to get people riled up, right? Because you're either a cat person, a dog person, or neither. Maybe not. Save the cats. Esther says save the cats. Whoa, I'm seeing lots of save the cats. Oh, Nicole's on the dogs. Okay. Again, the point being, like, look, some of these might seem silly, but it's just a perfect example of how new technologies are creating really an endless array of new issues. If you're interested at all, I suggest you go to this website. It's called moralmachine.net, and you can explore dozens of these scenarios. I'll ask you one last one, and this was actually mentioned by someone in the comments a minute ago. I like it. What about if the car has to decide, kill the driver, right, of the car, or kill a person that is in the road? So just 1-to-1, but is there a difference between the driver of the car and a pedestrian? What do folks think? Parker says, hey, it better prioritize me. I'm paying for the car. Oh, some other folks are saying the pedestrian. So again, how do we come up with these lines? How do we come up with these decisions? Maybe some of it's our own morals, right? Maybe some of it's we're looking outside of ourselves to society. What's more valuable? These are the same types of policy questions that animate all of the laws on the books. Same sorts of questions we're going to have to wrangle with as more of these technologies come out. Okay, let's look at a couple more. If you have Fitbits or any other health devices that track, much more than just like your heart rate these days, right? Can track your oxygen content of your blood and all kinds of crazy stuff. What happens when that data is in an insurer's hands or your employer's hands or the government's hands? Maybe we feel comfortable with that. Maybe we say, hey, I don't mind if my health information is being used by all of these folks. But, you know, a lot of other of us probably are pretty worried about what a company might do if they knew, for an example, you had some serious health condition, right? Would they fire you? Could they? Right? Lots of questions around health data popping up all the time. And then we have something that to me is a little bit scarier. And so that is mega emerging technologies. It's not a scientific term, but like huge world-changing new technologies. That may sound a little bit, sci-fi, fear-mongering, but look, for an example, quantum computers. Quantum computers operate in this really neat way that basically allows the computer to carry out almost an infinitely more powerful number of processes than traditional computers. I won't go into the science and technicalities of it, but to give you an example, the first group, maybe a company, might be a government, that creates a true quantum computer would be able to guess everyone's TikTok password. If you're a TikTok fan, you'll know what I mean. Everyone's TikTok password in the world in a matter of minutes. In a matter of minutes. How do we even function as a society when there is a piece of technology that can break through all of our data security, can get to any piece of data in the world? How should we regulate that sort of power? Now, maybe your response is, Joe, that's not happening, or it's not happening soon, but I wouldn't be so sure. There's a number of both huge companies and startups that at least claim they are very close to creating the first quantum computer. China just committed billions of dollars towards a program to build a quantum computer. So it is potentially not as far off as we might think. Now, in other areas of the law where we have a lot of experience in things that are very dangerous and big like this, we have all sorts of frameworks and regulations and ways that the law helps regulate and process how we use these things. But when it comes to emerging technologies, for the most part, again, it's the Wild West. It's kind of just out there. People can do what they want. We've already, I'm sure folks have heard of robot surgery, right? This is being used in hospitals all across the world. And what happens when the robot messes up? I mean, this has already occurred, and we've had to figure out who's liable. Is it the company that created that robot? Is it the operator? Is it the patient who knew what they were getting into, right, and signed their consent form? Now, here we might have some older legal frameworks that we just try to graft on to this new technology because we've already had in the past, for an example, doctors messing up, right? So we kind of have some framework. And that is true of these other emerging technologies too. We might have prior frameworks that would say we would try to force this in and fit it in to this new emerging technology. The problem is it doesn't line up completely, right? And so we're left with all these open questions. So with all of these emerging technologies, and I could talk for the next 6 hours about hundreds more, how we should regulate them, who should be controlling them or using them, and how, we really don't have those answers. And it's not completely lawyers' jobs to figure that out, but lawyers play a massive pivotal role when we regulate things. They help us construct the laws themselves. They help us when it comes to actually enforcing those laws, right? It's judges and lawyers playing those roles. And yet you need lawyers that are interested in this stuff and that are learning about it in order for them to play that role. And yet we have very few lawyers that are coming out of law school and heading straight for all of these open, exciting questions, which also on the other side, I will just mention, makes it a really fascinating, rewarding area, right? Because you have the chance to have these very wide-ranging ramifications on society in a way that in other areas of the law that have been around forever, you just don't. And so it is an exciting time. What I think might be a fun little way for this to all come together, especially to see the role a lawyer might play in all of this, I thought we could look at bots. So I'm actually talking about, bots are used in lots of different ways, but talking about, AI chatbots. You've probably heard of these already. Versions of these bots are now able to write news articles or social media posts. For an example, this little post was written by an AI, not a person. And as you read it, it sounds normal, right? You may not even realize it was written by a bot. In the last election, bots got a lot of attention because, we had thousands or tens of thousands of bots running and creating posts and creating users on social media. So lots of interesting stuff going on. Oh, I have a couple of good questions here. I'll just stop for one moment because it's about what I was just talking about. So Jack asks, is there any reason why kind of emerging technology is so unpopular? I don't want to suggest it's unpopular, like no one is doing it. It's just if you think about how many challenges there are and how many folks we need to be thinking hard on this stuff, it's not that much. The other reason is, look, anytime that you are dealing with technology, you've got the law stuff, which is the codes and the case law and all of that stuff. And then you have the technology, right? The science and the engineering to understand. I did patent litigation right out of law school, and it's a similar vein there. You have to understand kind of the science, which is tough on its own. And then you also have to understand all the legal stuff. So that's one reason, right? There's just another layer of challenge, which makes it a little scary for some folks. But the truth is, when you get into this area, it's not that bad, right? You don't have to be a computer programmer. You don't have to be an engineer to understand the important parts of the technology, at least for purposes of, creating new laws, drafting new laws, and then enforcing new laws. We're talking about the context of court cases and all that kind of stuff. So what might be a cool thought experiment to kind of bring all this together, it's a good example of also, look, there are some states that are trying to wrap their heads around how do we deal with all this new stuff. So California said, hey, we've got these bots going around creating all this mischief. We're going to pass a statute. We're going to enact a statute. And the statute is going to say, look, if you're using a bot online, it's going to be unlawful to use that bot if you are operating it with the intent, and this is at the bottom, in this bottom clause right here, operating with the intent to mislead another person, right, that's interacting with that bot, about the bot's artificial identity. So that's step one. Is the bot trying to trick the person on the other side into thinking that the bot is actually a human? Okay. Second piece of this statute says you have to have the intent, with the purpose of knowingly deceiving the person about the content of the communication to incentivize a purchase of or sale of goods or services. So, or to influence a voter in an election. So that's kind of going after what I was just mentioning with the last election. Okay. So California's saying, look, if you're using a bot to trick people in order to get them to buy stuff or to get them to vote one way or the other, it's going to be unlawful. You're going to have to pay. So great. We've made some progress here. We've got a state, with some really forward-thinking lawyers and legislature, thinking, hey, we're going to start getting ahead of this and figuring out how to deal with this new technology, this new problematic technology. We have that laundry list we just looked at of new technologies. California picked one. Great, progress. That's step one, right? We already needed lawyers to help us get here. But now the hard part really happens, which is, great, we have a statute. But how do we actually apply that statute in real life? So you may have read that language I just showed you and thought, hey, this is pretty straightforward. If you're using a bot to trick people out of money, great. But let's consider this little example and see what we think. So if you look at this middle section, the facts, and if you grab that little handout, you can also use the handout. The facts. So we represent this company, P.A.D Corp. It's a software company based in Nevada. I gotta give some love to Nevada because that's where I'm at and that's where I teach. P.A.D, our client, created an app that the public can use to download on their smartphone. It's called the P.A.D bot. The app allows users to automate their responses to others that text them on their phone. Okay, so basically you can create a bunch of pre-made responses. P.A.D advertises that its bot is so advanced you'll forget it's a bot. Users have created extensive lists of these pre-built answers that will, be sent to the texter depending on what, words they use, so that people communicating with the user often don't realize the answers are automated. Several users have used the P.A.D bot to text and sell things among their friends and family, like homemade jewelry. We've got an Etsy situation going on here. Several users of the P.A.D bot purchased it solely to carry out the sales activity. So what I'd like you all to do is just take a couple minutes. I know most of us are not lawyers, but take a couple minutes and just, I'll be honest with you, right? Like, probably have most of the tools you need to be a decent lawyer, critical thinking skills and your common sense. And let's just ask, do we think our client is subject to the statute? And do we think that they're going to be held liable? So I'll give you a couple minutes to think. I've got some questions over here on the right. If you just want to tackle it at a high level and just say, hey, I think our client's going to be in trouble or not, and here's why, that's great. If you want to be more granular, you can go through these questions. We won't go through them all together today, but is our client even subject to the statute, given that they're in Nevada and this is a California statute? Do you think our client intended to mislead folks about the bot's artificial identity? Did our client have the purpose of knowingly deceiving folks about the content of the communications? And was this to incentivize a purchase or sale of goods or services? And then if you don't think our client is directly going to get in trouble, it's not directly subject to the statute, do you think its own customers, its users, have violated this statute or are violating the statute, at least in the way they're using the bot, right? This last couple points here. So take a couple minutes. You can either read through the slide up here or the handout, and then I would love to hear your thoughts, your gut reactions, no right or wrong answers. What do you think? We've got the statute. We've got this client asking for us for help. What do we tell them? So just take a couple minutes and then we'll chat about your ideas. Okay, I'm loving some of the comments already that are coming in. So one of you says, hey, client's not subject to the statute because P.A.D did not intend to mislead concerning the AI's identity, and there's no intentional deception. Okay. Now do keep in mind that P.A.D advertises, hey, this is so advanced, you'll forget it's a bot. And they know that folks are using it to communicate with people who often don't realize the answers are automated, and those users are using it to sell things among their friends. But look, the true answer is this could go either way. So great thoughts. Alicia says, look, don't think, you think that P.A.D Corporation isn't liable because they're not selling, they're kind of not using the bots to sell themselves, even if the individuals using it most likely are. So, I think that's how a lot of folks come out on this issue. If you sell a product that is being used for some mischief, but you yourself aren't using it in a way that violates the statute, right? You shouldn't be within that statute. On the other hand, right, should the seller be liable anyways because they're facilitating this happening? An analogy you might be familiar with is being an accomplice, right? You're helping, you're assisting in violating the statute. In lots of other contexts, we hold folks liable because they create something or they do something that they know is being used by others to carry out some bad act. So maybe that would happen here as well. And when it sounds like more folks agreeing that individual users might have violated the statute. So again, question being, do we think then that P.A.D should get in trouble because it knows folks are using its bot for this violative, right, this bad act? This, in California, legislature thinks it's a bad act. And maybe you think, well, it depends on how many folks are using the app for these, horrible things. If it's just a couple, well, you can't hold a company liable for that. But imagine that most of P.A.D's customers are using the app to go trick people, right, into buying things. Is there a point at which you'd say, yeah, P.A.D, you need to be held on the hook? Now, obviously, we're representing P.A.D, right? So we're going to be trying to avoid that. But if we're thinking about how the law should work, all tough questions. Oh, I like that. Christopher says, hey, P.A.D should post a warning about usage in California. So maybe you mean, look, you can't use this in California, use it in other states. And that way P.A.D is trying to encourage its users not to violate the law. I like it. Awesome thoughts. Okay. Well, I want to shift gears because we don't have a whole lot of time left, but love the comments. I love you all breaking this down like true lawyers. I want to talk about the flip side. So that pitch was, look, we've got all of these emerging technologies raising all of these crazy questions about, is this stuff okay? How should these technologies be used? What are we comfortable with? And really, lawyers stand as one of the most important pieces in that puzzle. But we need folks that are interested and engaged in the law to help us deal with all that. So here's this flip side, and that is, how can technology change the actual practice of law? I'll tell you, it is a very exciting time to me, especially being, in the education side and the teaching side, because what we're seeing is this growing group of lawyers who view themselves more as innovators than as just lawyers. And this is also related to the emerging technology stuff, right? Because that requires innovation as well. But, these folks are saying, I'm going to not just develop my legal skills. If you're in law school or going to go to law school, there'll be things like learning how to apply a case, learning how a statute works. I'm going to learn a lot more than that. I'm going to learn how to use technology. I'm going to learn leadership skills, business skills, processes skills. And what's so great about this is these folks are looking at problems to be solved, not just cases. They're questioning why. A lot of legal practice has been the same for the last 150 years. Is that a good thing, right? Are there things that we could be changing to offer better service to folks? These legal innovators are constantly, revisiting how they practice. They're experimenting, right? In some ways, they're more entrepreneur than lawyer. And oftentimes, folks will refer to this movement as, legal entrepreneurialism. Now, you might say that all sounds fun, but why do we actually need legal innovators? Why is this the time for legal innovation? If you're in law school or going to law school or a lawyer, why should you be a legal innovator instead of just a lawyer? So the first reason is most people who need a lawyer these days can't get one. I was very surprised when I first got into the law many years ago that most of the court system concerns folks representing themselves, not lawyers. So that is the vast majority of both state and federal courts are cases that at least one party is representing themselves. And so when you think about it that way, lawyers aren't even, that big of a piece of the court system, right? It's mostly about the parties, the people. And there's lots of reasons that is so. For one, folks just can't afford a lawyer. That's probably the most important factor. Criminal defendants, vast majority of them can't afford a lawyer. And you might think, by the way, Joe, you get a lawyer, right? If you're in the criminal system, we have a right to a lawyer. Not true. I mean, it's true in some stages you get a lawyer, but there are plenty of stages in the criminal process that you don't get a lawyer. One that you may be familiar with is after you've exhausted your appeals, you have no more right to a lawyer. And this is when you hear about all these actual innocence cases where folks find, that key piece of evidence or DNA or something like that 10, 20, 30 years after someone's been put in prison. You have no right to a lawyer in any of those stages. And so those folks are often being helped by, law school clinics or folks helping just out of the goodness of their heart. You imagine how many more criminal defendants are out there that could be aided, right? Who might be innocent, but just do not have a right to a lawyer. When you go to the civil side, again, huge, massive amount of cases just don't involve lawyers. Why does that matter? Look at this. This is based on a small court in New York. Chance of winning a landlord dispute. And these researchers compared the cases where folks had lawyers and the cases where they didn't. You could see it's a massive difference, right? So we have this conundrum of most people can't afford a lawyer. They can't get a lawyer, but people really need lawyers. They're in court. They're in legal issues. They need legal help. I sometimes like to think about this stat, which is, if you haven't gone to law school or you haven't practiced yet, you may not realize how hard it is to prepare a document and file it in court. It is extremely hard. On average, there might be 200 steps to prepare a single document for filing. How in the world are you going to do that if you're not trained? And so technology is one way that we can take, a lawyer's expertise, so your expertise right after you study the law, and start making it available to folks at scale. So that is, we can say, hey, I'm going to take your legal knowledge, turn it into some sort of technology, right? Combine it with technology, and now we can serve way more people. These are some examples of new technologies that are being used to either make legal services much cheaper, so I can help a lot more people and still make the same amount of money, right? The legal system doesn't break down, or making fully self-sufficient technologies that members of the public can just use, right? They don't need a lawyer at all. Maybe you've heard of LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer. Those companies have taken a narrow set of, mostly transactional sorts of things and basically, allowed you to use their tools to fill out forms. Very helpful. LegalZoom just announced its IPO. It's very exciting, but that's just still a tiny fraction of all of the cases and all the legal needs out there. So this is, to me, one of the most exciting areas right now. We have tons of lawyers, but not nearly enough in terms of what people need, and charging way more than the vast majority of us can afford. And yet we have this technology that would allow us to take all of that knowledge and expertise and make it available to so many more. And yet we just don't have a whole lot of lawyers embracing technology yet. For the most part, most lawyers are scared of technology. Now, what's cool is the small group of lawyers who are realizing, wow, I can use technology to do all of this exciting stuff, to create simple tools where clients can get legal advice, even if they can't afford a lawyer, or will just help me provide service to more folks for less money. There's some great examples of single lawyers having these huge impacts using technology. So for an example, document automation, it's kind of the same idea as LegalZoom. So this is where you program a tool with your legal knowledge that will ask clients questions, and then depending on their answers, put together a legal document kind of automatically. One example is, when the travel ban hit during coronavirus, during the pandemic, a lawyer, I want to emphasize, with no tech background, no coding background, created an app in a day that allowed people how to navigate that ban and determine whether they were within or outside that ban. Helped thousands of folks for free. Another cool part of this is it's not just about, doing things for free, which is wonderful. It's also, absolutely a way to help more folks who have some money, right? Like could afford some help, but just can't afford the exorbitant rates that many lawyers charge. And so this lawyer said, hey, I'm going to create this app. He was able to help these thousands of people. He also gained dozens of paying clients because his app was so helpful. And we just see all sorts of these cool examples of, technological savvy lawyers having these huge impacts with technology. And I want to emphasize again, no coding, no programming, no science background, just using existing platforms out there, taking your legal knowledge and basically, downloading them into the technology. Even law students, here at UNLV, we have our William S. Boyd School of Law is at UNLV. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but we have law students with no technology background creating tools that are helping the public. One of my students created this Find a Lawyer app for Project Lifeline, and this isn't a tool that's being used, right, by folks every day. And he made this over a semester using very simple platforms. And look, we couldn't do this kind of stuff even a few years ago, 5 years ago, but we're at this cusp where we have this huge, wide array of technology tools that would allow us to do all of this exciting stuff for folks. We just need the lawyers who are interested and can take all that legal stuff we do and work with the technology so that we can make legal services available to far more folks. I know we're getting pretty close to out of time. If you are interested, I've included in the handout, if you grabbed that earlier, a final little thought experiment that hopefully illustrates to you how easy it is. If you're a law student or you're an aspiring law student, or especially if you're a lawyer, how easy it is to use technology to build things that will help people. That you need no programming knowledge. It gets so many folks who ask me, don't I have to go study programming or become a computer science engineer or something? And the answer is absolutely not. There are so many platforms that are built that you can use to create apps or different tools that require zero background knowledge. Again, that's what makes this such an exciting time for legal folks. So a couple questions have popped up. One is, so I mentioned it's a great time to be a legal innovator. What would you say the legal innovation of the last generation was? Interesting. Yeah, so innovation and technology kind of go hand in hand. I use the term legal innovation, a lot of folks do, to mean a lot more than just technology, right? It's sometimes about using technology because that's new and holds lots of potential to do cool things. But innovation can also just be asking, is there a better way to do things than we've done it before? So both of those kind of go hand in hand. The innovation side, there's tons of great examples, both recent and far-reaching. One example I just mentioned, right? Using tools like document automation, LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, those have made a huge impact. You think about how many folks are starting their own small businesses right now and using those kind of tools to file their corporate paperwork and all that. There's no way these folks would have been able to afford a lawyer to go and work on, their company and build everything. But now that we have these apps available, we can go out, start our own company in like an hour, right? For almost nothing. Yes, Happy, you got a question to share handouts? Absolutely happy to. We will definitely share those. This is a good question from Alicia. So when it comes to lawyering disputes that involve specialized knowledge, tech's a challenge, but lawyering has been done in highly specialized fields before. Can we look to these precedents for wisdom? I mean, absolutely, Alicia, no question about it. We lawyers have dealt with complicated, nuanced, tough challenges in the past. Like what makes it a little harder right now is just the number of those challenges being thrown at us each day, right? So you have one big new thing that happens, we're all on top of it, great. When you have, 100 new challenges thrown at kind of every sector of our society, at a personal level, at a corporate level, that's where it gets a little tricky. And you really need all hands on deck. You need folks that are engaged and interested to get on top of this. It's also why it's so exciting right now, right? Because it just allows new lawyers to play such a big role as leaders, right? And figuring out how we're going to deal with this stuff and how we should be dealing with this stuff. That's the first half. The second half is how can we use technology? How can we change up the practice of law? I'll share one final example of the innovation side. If folks have heard about this, there's a couple states now, Utah and Arizona, who have allowed non-lawyers to be involved in owning law firms. This is such a big deal because it signals, legal profession realizing that there's lots of tools and expertises and skill sets that could all come together to change how we're providing legal services to folks. Maybe we don't need lawyers to do all of that stuff, and maybe it would be really valuable for lawyers to work with other experts and use other tools to provide legal services. This is after, hundreds of years of, it only being a lawyer show. In my view, this is one place where I'll just share my opinion. We hear lots of talk about technology replacing lawyers, and now we hear some talk of folks who are not lawyers replacing lawyers, right? But technology and innovation and working with folks who have different skill sets can allow us to do new things that lawyers have never been able to do in the past. I mean, that's my take on it. There's a lot of research, a lot of data to back up that perspective. And I think the easiest way to think about that is, think of technology, think of an innovation as empowering lawyers. And I think we're getting to a much more exciting place. We think about technology and innovation just replacing what lawyers are doing, imagining the lawyers are just going to disappear someday. That's not realistic. We are so far away from an AI being able to fully replicate what a lawyer does, at least, many aspects of what a lawyer does. And that perspective just ignores how much more you can do if you combine a lawyer and technology and innovation, as opposed to trying to think about how to replace a lawyer, right? And so that's why I would say, do not be afraid. If you're getting into the law or you are a lawyer or a new lawyer, do not be afraid that technology is just going to come and wipe out this whole profession. It's not happening. Is it going to change things? Yes, no question. It is going to change things. Is it going to remove some of what lawyers have done in the past? Totally. Is it going to change your day-to-day and change what it means to be a lawyer? Certainly. But the good side of all that is it's also making new things possible that were never possible in the past. And that's the part that I think folks should be really excited about and embrace. So I think we are out of time. I see questions coming in still. I'll throw out a couple things. One is I am delighted to continue this conversation with anyone who's interested. I believe Corey and the File for Delta folks have all my contact information. Please, please, please reach out. You can also just Google me, right? All over the internet. My email's in my bio page. Please reach out if you're curious about, hey, this stuff sounds interesting and I'm going to law school and I'm interested in the law. How do I learn more? Reach out. Love to send you resources. If you are thinking about actually getting into an area of emerging technology or how to use technology, would love to share ideas and